The great host of ascended masters come to restore a long forgotten memory to an orphan humanity. It does not really matter whether a person consider themselves to be rich and increased with goods, or consider themselves to be impoverished. For the most part, the billions of people alive on the earth today are an orphaned race. They do not truly have the sense of the divine parentage. They are bereft of a sense of origins, a sense of where they have come from and where they are going. As a mass, they are furthermore poverty-stricken in that they do not, en masse, for the most part, feel themselves to be the firstborn offspring of the God identity. They don't feel that from the divine standpoint, they are legitimately born into the cosmos, but are rather kind of illegitimate, bastard, male or female offspring who must kind of scrounge for eking out an earthly existence. This is true because they do not have a correct understanding of their own identity or their own sense of origin in the heart of God. This you, as Ascended Master students, must cultivate, must rediscover if need be for yourselves, and must hold in your conscious awareness. And it is for this reason that the Ascended Masters come time and time again to remind, to restore, to reinforce in your confidence level that this is indeed the truth. You know, in the myths and legends and stories that are common to most cultures around the world, there are certain archetypes of these stories that seem to stand the test of time and survive being told and retold over and over again with variations on the theme. Psychologists might argue that some of these are actually a working out of the collective subconscious, of problems of understanding one's identity. One of those recurring themes is something that we would call to your attention today. That even sometimes, as the adversities of life confront the students of the light, they might be tempted to fall back into that way of looking at life. It is the story of a well-to-do child of wealthy parentage, perhaps royal or noble parentage, who soon after birth is lost or orphaned and grows up not knowing who his or her parents are, and certainly oblivious to the worldly inheritance to which they are heir. And so this orphaned one goes through all kinds of trials and tribulations until at long last there is the remembrance or the restoration through one literary device or another of that inheritance, and that one is restored to their rightful place. Nowhere is this more poignantly portrayed than in the Charles Dickens story of Oliver Twist, especially as that was adapted to musical theater and eventually a movie score. I call to your mind and pull upon your own heartstrings the scene in which the young tousle-haired lad has been sold into serfdom, locked in a coal cellar, scrambles up onto the barred window as the snow is falling in the evening, looking out the window, plaintively crying, "Where is love? Where is my mother? Where my father?" I tell you, it really doesn't matter whether someone is surrounded by a fortification of wealth, of material goods, or whether they are having to struggle. Everyone has a level of a heart's yearning for this restoration of the divine, because save with a very, very few notable exceptions, in particular the wonderful teachings of the Ascended Masters, there is no framework for understanding one's origins or one's parentage in the divine. Let's just take a look, for example, what we have as choices offered up by the world. In the modern society, probably there's a great deal of materialistic, agnostic view of the question, where a lot of our society in the Western world, and especially, is more concerned about today and tomorrow and next week and the practicalities of life and getting ahead, so that the process of commercial aggrandizement, of getting ahead in business and so forth, of providing for one's family, by the time all of that is taken care of, leisure is taken care of, it's time to wake up and start that same cycle all over again. And those questions are left for others to meditate on. So a large segment of our society has simply repressed the entire question as not being really important to them. In other aspects of our religion, we see that in the Judeo-Christian community, early on, there was not even necessarily the concept of a soul in the earliest aspects of Judaism. Certainly by the time of the birth of Christ and thereafter, the idea of the soul had taken full sway. It was there in some respects, inherited from the Greek mystery religions that were grafted onto the early Christian beliefs. And so there was the idea that souls are minted freshly with either conception or 9 months later at birth. That somehow or another there is a divine Hephaestus in heaven, like a metal worker who is minting souls fresh, one freshly minted at the very moment of birth. And so let us consider how many hundreds of millions of Christians and others around the world have as a mindset from birth to death that they, as a separate self, only came into existence, blinked into existence with the moment of their birth. And perhaps they're going forward. I'm sure you can appreciate that if you really inherit and accept and believe that concept, that doesn't put you very close into the divine family, does it? It doesn't make you the proud, respected firstborn of the one God Almighty. No, you are simply a superior form of a creation, something that has been created by the Creator, with this thing called a soul, which makes you a little bit superior to the other creatures of the earth, but certainly not a member of the divine family as beloved Jesus. In the East, they have another alternative view of these things, and that is that the current status of human consciousness is the product of an almost interminably long past evolutionary development of conscious awareness. In fact, until the Ascended Master teachings of the 20th century, it was very much espoused certain elements along these lines. In the West, there was a Hermetic tradition that first a stone, and then a metal, and then a plant, and then an animal, and then a man, and then a God, if you will. But here again, you have this long separation from the deity. How could someone who has styled themselves to be just sitting at the top of a long evolutionary line that traces itself back to the trilobites, the single-celled amoebas, the amphibians that climbed out of the primeval slime and developed lungs, how can someone who considers themselves to be that at the same time appropriate a sense of their own cosmic worth in the heart of the Godhead? How could they really consider that they had this intimate first-person connection with the Godhead, vis-a-vis a divine father, a divine mother, a divine parent? As in the case, let's take, for example, back when a couple hundred years ago, when it was still fashionable to have kings and queens. Yes, there were indeed these august kings and queens. But in the case of their own children, hopefully, those children would have access to the royal person and a more familiar, intimate connection with that divine parent, would be able to enter into that closeness, whereas perhaps that wouldn't be true of others. And that was the analogy that should be carried on between ourselves and this Godhead. So the fatherhood of God, the motherhood of God, seems to be far off, far stretching back into the far, far distant past. The third alternative, as I mentioned to you, is the one of modern science, where we human beings simply have superior gray matter in the number of neurons in our brains and our ability to process information. That really is the only distinction between us and the other primates, the other sapiens, and so forth. Imagine if that should be what you consider of yourself. Imagine that someone believing that of themselves and having a mindset that has crystallized along those lines to where it has become like a rhinoceros hide of grizzled, tanned, non-responsive thought substance. It would become a straitjacket that would not allow reaching into the divine. So we do have on our planet an orphan race, a race that does not sense its own innate, intimate connection with the God of very gods and of all of the vastness of love that is to be had within that divine identity. All of you, as students of the light, must be very alert that you do not, out of laziness or habit, fall back into any of these ruts that are part of the deep-seated racial consciousness of the human race of the planet Earth. Many's the time that we have talked about your higher mind of your own beloved Holy Christ self, and of how it is possible for you to commune with that mind, to marry and blend together your heart and your outer thoughts with that mind of your Holy Christ self. In addition to that blessed mind, there are other vehicles of consciousness that are innately yours, one of which we would like to speak about in just a few moments, and that is the causal body, another vehicle of consciousness. Because in that body, there is preserved for all eternity your divine past. But I don't want to get quite ahead of that, because when we come to that, you should be fully prepared to put on that garment of your divine memory. So let us go back to one of the points about these other misconceptions about who you are, where you've come from, and where it is that you are going. Part of this explanation becomes something you are able to master when you finally grasp the nature of the human mind. The process of life in this world and the process of consciousness in this world is made possible by the buildup of a finite mind. Without it, you couldn't have the limitations that are here. Perhaps you're familiar with the concept in the East of Maya, and the idea that this sensory world out here is illusory. It is a world of Maya. Perhaps you can even appreciate that from the standpoint of your own mighty I Am presence and the ascended masters, this world that seems so absolutely painfully tangible and real to our senses is, to their perception, a world of illusion, temporarily manifesting, but a world of Maya. They would look at this world and the present moment that we're in the way that we would watch waves lapping on the shore of the beach and recognize how temporary is the wave form, how it expends its energy and then is no more. That is really what we have here with this world. Why then does it seem to have such a grip upon us? Why do we seem to be ensnared within it? Because we have a human mind that has bought into the illusion. And it is the combination of our mind interacting with this outer Maya that makes it appear to be so very powerful. However, we are not bound by that mind. We are not obliged to remain imprisoned within the cave of that mind and its dualistic perceptions. Your Holy Christ self, in its thinking process, in its perceptions, looks down as from the top of a pyramid, which is the symbol we have of our July class, from the point that Saint Germain has defined as the coin of vantage. And your Christ mind is able to recognize the limitations and the Mayic powers of this outer world. Why is that important to today's perception? Because fundamental to all of this, there are two principles that are joined with this mind. And those are the principles, literally, of time and space. Saint Germain has given us an explanation about this that is very, very central to the whole issue of you being able to identify with your mighty I Am presence. And I'll tell you right now, the goal of the Brotherhood's work is that you will have restored to you the same sense of origin that was the power used by beloved Jesus, as he was always quite aware in the forefront of his consciousness that he had come forth out of that God presence whom he called Father. He had descended out of that God presence. He was here on the earth for a period of time to accomplish a certain work decreed by that God presence with which he was inextricably one, and that having completed that work, he was going to return on the upcurrent back into the heart of that God presence from whence he had come. So he had that sense of belonging to the divine family. He had a sense that that was his inheritance, and it defined who he was. It defined his outlook on life. It gave him the ability to look out with equanimity of spirit on all of the things that were happening out here in this world of vicissitudes, in this world of ebb and flow. And it enabled him to draw on the power of that source, of that presence from which he had come, even while he was here. Notice he did not get all embroiled in the momentary struggles that were going on down here below. You may recall at the time, Rome occupied Jerusalem and Israel, and there were zealots in Israel whose sole purpose in life was to foment a revolution to evict the terrible Gentile Romans from the sacred precincts of the sacred land. And that spirit infiltrated into the ranks of the 12 disciples, namely and especially Judas Iscariot, who sought to arrange a confrontation between Jesus and the Romans, in the hopes not that Jesus would be crucified, but that he would use his supernatural powers to begin the role of the military Messiah to evict the Romans. So that was his master strategy, that Jesus would be provoked into open warfare and would lead the Israelites against the Romans and have them evicted. And of course, over and over again, what was Jesus' response? Other than to say, "We seek no continuing city here. My kingdom is not of this world." He had a sense of the paltry value of trying to too great a degree, make this world the be-all and the end-all of life. He understood, he had this sense, because already the God consciousness of his own mighty I Am presence, causal body and holy Christ self were fully integrated with his outer awareness, and he knew what really was his divine destiny and the realms of ascended master light that were his true home of light and his true kingdom. So there is great power to be derived when you understand that even though you might have a sense to a greater or lesser degree that you're like the little orphan Oliver or any orphan Annie or any one of the other archetypal orphans who have roamed the earth trying to scrape out a hard scrapple subsistence life on this very harsh planet Earth where there is so much strife. Rather than you have that sense, you need to remember that it doesn't really matter the appearance. What counts is the truth of you. And the truth of you has been preserved all since time immemorial and time eternal. The truth of you is still recorded. The records are in your causal body. But let's talk about time and space as Saint Germain explains it, so that you can look to that divine presence with supreme God consciousness. Here is one of the ways in which he has explained it. Let us disabuse the minds of the beloved students of the sense of time, of distance or space. The key in consciousness, which will open for you all higher spheres, lies in the simplicity and the firmness of this self-control. Dwell earnestly on the great truth that where your consciousness is, there you are, for I am everywhere. Long you have dwelt in the consciousness that there was space, that there was great distance, that there is time. All of this is the outer creation of man. See, Saint Germain just cleans the whole playing field in one vast sweep. Reminded of that scene from the movie of Searching for Bobby Fischer, when the master chess player is trying to teach the young neophyte how to see all of the configurations on the board, and he contemptuously takes his arm and sweeps every single piece from the pawn to kings and queens off the board. And this is what the Ascended Masters are inviting you to do, is to not be cowed by the mind's fixation on the senses and the outer observations of time and space. What you're dealing with is countless embodiments in which you have forfeited away the power of your God presence, and you have used your divine authority to fritter away your power and to grant power to things outside yourself that ought not to have had such power. Long dwelling in this consciousness that there was space, great distance, or time, this is all but the outer creation of man, and that is true. This has been taught in the East a lot more scientifically, that the outer mind and its interaction with this outer world creates this phenomenon of the linear passage of time, the vastness of space, and man is this little microcosm in the midst of it all. To step through this gossamer veil that separates your outer consciousness from the full inner power and activity is but a state of thought and feeling. Take your firm stand. I am the power of my complete self-control, forever sustained, and this will make it easier for you to gain this mastery. Students must be conscious that when they recognize the I Am presence is acting, it may not be interfered with in any way. Know that there is no time or space. And in that knowing, the vastness of eternity will come within your grasp. The outer delusion, the outer consciousness of mankind has built up, creating time and space in their belief. This has been the great stumbling block to humanity's freedom. So, if you are to rise into the higher consciousness of your God presence, you must let go of the grip of the mind that has a vice-like grip. The mind, in that respect, could be compared to a pit bull that has latched on to some poor, helpless creature with its jaws with a vice-like grip and is holding on for dear life. That is what the outer mind has done. And one of the ways in which it has created this, the most harmful, is in that sense of time and the linear flow of time, and therefore the whole concept of evolution. That instruction on evolution is also one of the most important points about having this sense of your divine God presence as your source and as the divinity from which you have stepped forth into these outer spheres. There is a great mistake which mankind have long made. In bringing it to your attention, I wish to indelibly impress it upon your consciousness. It is this: through outer observation, the outer consciousness of mankind has observed the outer world, the world of nature, creation, from the standpoint of growth. When, to the student of the light, it should be looked at from the standpoint of expansion. In other words, you watch things in nature, and they seem to begin as a seed, and they take time to grow through a growth cycle before at long last coming to fruitage. And so extrapolating from that observation, the same is impressed as how people understand themselves. And Saint Germain is saying that this is a very tragic flaw, that you must unlearn, or you won't be able to recover from it. Because the correct understanding will wipe out of your consciousness this idea of growth. For growth to the outer senses requires either a short or a longer period of time, according to one's comprehension. Whereas the idea of the expansion of the light will enable the individual consciousness to feel their liberty and freedom more quickly now. It is the privilege of the Ascended Masters to express and to use the completed, perfected form of every precipitation which we wish to use. Therefore, the consciousness of expansion comes about through the recognition of the expansion of the Mighty I Am Presence, the all-powerful principle of life, animating, governing, and directing the outer form. It is time now that the students erase from their consciousness this idea of growth, which signifies more or less the expenditure of time, and enter into their God-given freedom through expansion. Then they may live, move, and be the fullness of that freedom in and all things, which is their birthright. There are few who have recognized in a small way that they live and move in their own perfected worlds, all even now. The idea or consciousness that there seems to have been a past, that there is today a present and possibly a future, has led the outer activity of the mind deep into this consciousness of growth. The realization of the expansion of the Mighty I Am Presence in the individual will enable all to understand this, enter into this perfect kingdom with enormously great speed and certainty. How this relates so very much to the sense of origins is that it dispels the idea of evolution, that you are evolving into your godhood, that you somehow or another were born as an ugly duckling, and you're going through your molting stages now, and somehow or another, at some future time, you will be transmogrified into a graceful, mature, divine Paramhansa, a divine swan gliding along, and that this will be an evolutionary process. That is that second of those alternatives that we spoke about before, to where you are not, as you sit here today, a part of that divine family, but it's something that you're going to evolve into. It's something that you're going to be transformed and become someday, thanks to the mercy of God and the fact that your higher self is going to merge with you, and you will become something that you aren't today. You are as much in your hearts today the fullness of the qualitative God presence as you shall ever be. It is not that you are an orphan, an illegitimate child of the universe, born into this world, and that you have to be somehow or another changed. You're not going to evolve into that. You already are that God presence. And this is the sense that you must have, is that this is your God parents' creation. You are the firstborn of your Mighty I Am Presence. You are the crown prince, if you will, or princess of this whole creation. Your source, your presence, the being that you are, that presence is the creator of all that has come forth, and you already have that royal blood flowing through your veins. It is yours by birth, by birthright. It is not something you have to deserve. It is not something that is given to you by a God who condescends to bestow this mercy and largesse upon you. In all of those cases, you're still begging with your begging bowl for the universe to be nice to you. That is not how mastery is attained. It is attained by stepping aside and allowing the dignified firstborn son or daughter of God, that is your God presence, to occupy the chalice and the temple of your being, to be the one self that you are. And to have that sense that there are these doting divine parents who have loved you from the beginning, who will love you forever. And as you are the crown prince or princess, you know you're going to be spoiled by all of the rest of the kingdom, because that's who you are. And all of God's creatures are going to rally to your cause because of that divine origin that is there within the heart of the glorious God presence. In our outer world, we, as our consciousness, as our threefold flame, are obliged to occupy the memory body, the so-called soul. And there are, as you know now, all of these accumulated records of all of the many embodiments that you and each of us have been through. And life on this planet being what it is, a lot of those records, I'm sure you would agree with me, are quite burdensome. And the heart has been obliged to lug that memory body around like a turtle carrying its shell, or a hermit crab that has gone in and occupied a chambered nautilus or some other subterranean shell and carried it around. Even so, your threefold flame has been obliged to carry that around. You're being trained and taught in the use of the various flames of God, the violet flame to lessen that burden, the blue lightning to break it up into little pieces so that the violet flame can devour it more quickly. All of these flames of God. The day is going to come when another memory body dawns into your consciousness, and that is the causal body, which is your divine memory body. When that body is activated in your consciousness, there might be flashes of it prior to the ascension. God willing, there will be, because as those flashes of the memory body come forth, no one will ever again take your crown. No one will ever be able to discourage you beyond repair. And you will have a healthy sense about the relative value of this world and of the fact that it doesn't have ultimate power over you. Because in fact, this being that is the individuality of your God presence has overcome this world. And so in that, you also are an overcomer of this world. This will occur not by evolution. It's already an etched record in your memory. What do I mean by that? Every aspect of your mighty I Am presence experience life, since coming forth from the heart of the great central sun, is recorded there in that memory body. All of the choices that have been made by your mighty I Am presence, all of the great drama, the vastness of eternity, all of that is recorded there. And it's not of someone else, it is of you. It is a heritage and a memory and a divine birth that simply has been forgotten because it vibrates at such a high rate of vibration that it doesn't really mesh with the outer consciousness. But as the resurrection and the ascension become yours, the full radiation of that memory body will come upon you like the sun rising up out of the eastern horizon. It will come so naturally. And as is always the case, it won't be someone else, and it won't be something new. It will be a remembering of this divine origin. Do you follow me? And as that remembrance becomes full-blown, secretly you'll be a little chagrined at yourself, how foolish you were before your ascension to tolerate such limitations in this earth that were wholly unnecessary, except you allowed them to. And you'll say, my goodness, why did I wait so long? Why was I so blind? Why was I so stubborn? So there is not really ultimately the need to wait for that causal body to come into action. All of you, from time to time, experience what it is like when the soul, the memory body, kicks up its heels and puts a lot of pressure on your outer consciousness. You all know what that's like. The causal body can likewise exert pressure. Only in this case, it is an edifying, celestial, elevating, ennobling, victorious, God-conscious pressure that the causal body applies to your world. And you do not have to wait for any of that to come to the fore until you're taking your last breath, especially if you desire to win your ascension. As more and more the pressure of the light of your causal body enters your world, you will feel the same self-worth that Jesus evidenced so many times in the testimony that we have from him of those times. You will feel how you yourself have, just as he, descended to this earth, and now you are returning home into these higher vehicles. That is the absolutely good news that the ascended masters have for the races of this planet. The positive truth that there is a God identity that is safe and secure in the heavens. As you come into this, you do feel a filial sense, a pulling action between you and the heart of your mighty I Am presence and the heart of the great central sun, the heart of the great God of love in the heart of the great central sun. That this life and this world, after all, is not only benign, but downright loving and caring for the sons and daughters that have been begetted by that great cosmos. We are eternally grateful to the Ascended Masters as they act on behalf of our own mighty I Am presence. They are sponsors, they are gurus, and yes, they are fathers and mothers to us. However, you do observe that they do not usurp the role, ultimately, of our own mighty I Am presence in our life. They do not crowd so close, so constantly, that we are not compelled to forge the connection and the God identity with our own mighty I Am presence. We've spoken before that this is a razor's edge of Christ discrimination, which the ascended masters must walk constantly, to be close enough to give us comfort and encouragement and the sense of safety and the sense of accomplishment that the future holds for us, to give us all of that, but not to be so very all-embracing that we feel like we can just rock back and be passive and be carried on the backs of these ascended masters into our ascension. That will never happen. They will not allow it to happen because that is not the plan. The plan is for each of us to become ourselves, that mighty I Am presence in its fullness, to become as Melchizedek, without father, without mother, without beginning or ending of days. This is the sense that your mighty I Am presence has. While there is this whole chain of hierarchy, you should have the awareness that your mighty I Am presence does not, in one sense, look to any other being as parents of your presence. For your God presence is so much the consciousness of the Godhead that it is as the consciousness of Melchizedek. Anupodaka, parentless, without father, without mother, without beginning or ending of days. As you have that sense, then all of the macrocosm opens up for you. And you have this supreme confidence that you don't have to evolve into anything that you aren't already, because the truth of your being is that you are this mighty I Am presence. What is needed is the expansion of the light, more of the same, from within out, more light coming forth, and the acceleration of the light to higher and higher attenuation and frequency. You can accelerate the light in your four lower bodies to where it will transfer the memory, the gnosis in your causal body so clearly and constantly through the outer four lower bodies that you will have this sense of eternity that you have come from and to which you go. This was the sense of beloved Saint Germain, and I'll close with these immortal words of his that capture all of this in one sublime meditation. From love I came, to love I go. And all this swing, both to and fro, alters not any jot of cosmic purpose I forgot. I reach out now to truth I vow, to love in all I ever bow. The universe is one alone, no clash of multifaceted tone. The chime I hear is ever near. 'Tis love that casts out every fear. Where'er I am, thy love lives too, to free the many and the few. Command perfection, love's great light. Command perfection, love's great law. Thy glowing beauty through the night, as star eternal, light supernal, woos us all by present might. For love I am, and love I live. This is the allness that I give. To each man-child the spark is given, 'twill rend the veil and bring to heaven.
What glorious words and teachings as we celebrate Father's Day here in the United States. I understand that Father's Day and Mother's Day alike are celebrated at different times and throughout the year in many other countries. So if you are listening in another country other than the United States, perhaps it is not a day of celebrating Father's Day today. But I do hope that in your heart it is always making room for the celebration of the Father and the Mother as the divine complement of your true identity.